After a short stint at the top of the game, Irelia has returned to her usual form with 2 top 8 finishes, both of which falling just 1 game short of the top 4. Taking a look at the 8th place list from Baobaoaz, we have a mid-range build that's pretty close to what's become the standard Irelia 40. 3 Unguard, 3 Discipline, and 3 Defiant Dance for combat tricks, 3 Stack Deck for draw support, 1 Guardian Angel and 2 Zoni's Hourglass to protect the 1 Irelia Fervent, 2 Lonely Poro and 2 Scuttlecrab as turn 1 plays, in addition to Guardian Angel and Zonia's that also offer draw power, 3 Defy and 1 Not So Fast as counter spells, 2 Charm to force combat when your opponent is on the back foot, 2 Ride the Wind and 3 Boots of Swiftness to help the small pool of units get around the board more easily, and 2 Stellarcorn Herder as a backup unit that can play off your combat tricks and movement tools, while also providing draw support. This deck is clearly built to gather as many options as possible through its units, so that it can use a variety of combat spells and gear to consistently get over opponents. The interesting spice for this main board is the inclusion of Gust, Flash, Starcrossed, Adaptatron, and Vex Apathetic. Gust has become extremely popular in this meta due to most of the top decks opting for faster styles of play, aside from Dazzling Aurora, which is answered with Starcrossed. Since Irelia doesn't always play units before slamming Irelia Fervent on the board, having a Gust in main and another inside can be really helpful for slowing opponents down to your pace. And since Irelia utilizes a Protect the Queen playstyle, she can pair her supporting units with Starcrossed to remove enemy units that she doesn't want to see in combat. And Flash is a really good defensive tool that can be held as a last resort if a showdown goes south. Taking a look at these last 2 units, we saw a lot of experimentation with Vex Apathetic and Irelia and Sydney, as both of these cards love the Protect the Queen playstyle, and Vex offers Irelia a solid answer for ambush units, so having at least 1 copy should become the standard. And one thing you'll notice about all the top 8 decks in Vancouver is that they all mainboard at least 1 copy of a Gear Hate card, which is where Adaptatron comes in. With the resurgence of Dazzling Aurora, every deck needs to run at least 1 card that can remove gear in their main board. Taking a quick look at the sideboard, we have an additional Gust for early game unit removal, an additional Not So Fast for more spell countering, an additional Starcrossed and a Rebuke for mid and late game unit removal, a Heart of Dark Eyes for offensive combat support, another Adaptatron for gear heavy matchups, Angler Beast for token decks, and Vex Cheerless for matchups that also lean into combat tricks. Finishing in 7th place, we have the only Dazzling Aurora deck to make the top cut, with Swag YOLO 420 Yaz Battle Mistress list. There's honestly not much to cover here, as this is incredibly close to a standard Sivir build, with just a couple of unique decisions. Aspirant's Climb, Sigil of the Storm, and Forgotten Monument are included as the trifecta for Dazzling Aurora list. 3 Elder Dragon as the best 12 drop in the game, 3 Dazzling Aurora of course, 1 Mind Splitter for some extra might and hand control, 1 Fading Memories because even Dazzling Aurora decks have to run their own Gear Hate now, 3 Catalyst of Aeons for rune channeling, 3 Lunar Boon for additional draw support, 3 Treasure Trove for draw support, 1 Pack of Wonders to combo with Treasure Trove, 2 Mobilize for rune channeling, 1 Sabotage for hand control, which is really crucial for eliminating your opponent's Gear Hate, 3 Stack Deck for draw support that also helps to keep your Elder Dragons in deck, 3 Scryer's Bloom for draw support and another way to keep Elder Dragon in deck thanks to Predict, 3 Gust for early game control to slow down aggro decks, and 3 Flurry of Blades thanks to its synergy with Elder Dragon. Now what's really unique about this list is how it handles situations where Elder Dragon has been drawn instead of played with Aurora. Last Rites has been standard with Chaos Aurora decks and Spirit Forged, but Swag YOLO 420 Yaz's decision to run 2 in addition to the Harrowing opens up much more freedom to play from anywhere. Thanks to Lunar Boon, he can discard drawn Elder Dragons and then replay them with Last Rites or the Harrowing. Taking a look at the sideboard, he also has Heedless Resurrection and a really interesting inclusion of Annie Stubborn to get even more value out of discarding Elder Dragon. I really like this potential out as it feels like a much more comprehensive synergy between Dazzling Aurora and the Chaos domain, beyond the incredible draw support that Chaos already offers. Rounding out the sideboard, we have an additional Pack of Wonders, 2 Challenge to help extend late game offense, 2 Uxtra and Mischievous for additional Gear Hate that plays really well into Aurora Mirror matchups, and an additional Mind Splitter for more control-oriented decks that may be running extra gear removal. Moving along to 6th place, we have Arito's Blade Dancer list, and there's a fair amount of spice worth digging into here. Abandoned Hall, Targon's Peak, and Sunken Temple slot in as really the staple battlefields for Irelia at this point. Then you have your standard 3 copies of Defiant Dance, Defy, Discipline, and Boots of Swiftness, as well as 2 Charm, 1 Flash, 2 Guardian Angel, 2 Ride the Wind, 2 Starcrossed, 1 Adaptatron, and 1 Vex Apathetic. But what I really like about this deck is how it's built as more of a tempo variant of Irelia compared to the mid-range lists that are more popular. With 3 Scuttlecrab, 3 Tide Turner, and 3 Stellarcorn Herder, this deck clearly emphasizes seeing these units on board, primarily for their utility, but also to help match tempo in the early stages of a game. And we also see a Mind Splitter as a nice top-end unit that really helps to close out games, and 1 copy of Pike Returned as a really cool way to mitigate the power usage that comes from all the equipment and spells in this deck. One of the Blade Dancer's best strengths is protecting an individual unit in combat, which gives a backline unit like Pyke a lot of space to operate. And since this list has a wider spread of units, it can afford to cut down on 3 on guard to 2, and slot in Hard Bargain instead of Not So Fast. And then we round out with 1 Edge of Night. I really like this build as it offers much more versatility with a few different game plans it can switch between, which can be crucial in a meta that's more open than what we've seen previously. And taking a brief look at the sideboard, we have 2 Gust for aggro matchups, 1 Not So Fast for spell heavy decks, 1 Heart of Dark Ice for additional offensive support, 2 more Adaptatron for gear heavy decks, 1 more Vex Apathetic for more support against ambush and aggro decks, and a Vex Cheerless for mirror matchups and combat based decks like Diana. Closing out the top 8, we have Rocklo's Emperor of the Sands list. What I like about this build, and really Azir in general for this format, is how prepared it is for Dazzling Aurora while also maintaining its status as an aggro deck. Most decks have to sacrifice some of their identity to be able to hold off Aurora long enough to beat it, as Aurora is now fast enough to consistently get online before opponents can close out games. But because of how the Order Domain plays into Aurora decks, Azir being so low to the ground actually makes it a really strong legend into the current Aurora builds. When looking at Rocklho's list, it's a solid mix of Azir's standard build with some new Unleashed tech and Order staples. Doran's Shield, Eye of the Herald, and the new Soul Sword are all excellent turn 1 equipment that pair well with Azir's legend ability. 1 On Guard, 1 Charm, 3 Defy, and 3 Discipline slot in as Calm staples. 1 Cold the Weak and 3 Hidden Blades slot in as Order staples that are really strong in token decks. 3 Brutalizer and 3 BF Sword round out the equipment spread. 2 Salvage and Main for Aurora matchups, 2 Guards for additional token creation, and 3 Arise is one of the best closing pieces for Azir. And then we round out the list with 2 Sacrifice, 1 Shadow's Call, and 2 Vi Peacekeeper as new Unleashed staples that help with draw support and combat respectively. This deck has so many ways to draw cards easily, while also getting way more value from its units with way less investment compared to most decks. It's honestly looking like the most ideal token deck in this format. And looking at the sideboard, we have 1 Death Grip as a combat trick that also helps with draw support and sequences with other cards like Sacrifice, 2 Guardian Angel for our chosen champion Azir Sovereign, an additional Call of the Week, 1 Disarming Rig for more gear removal, 2 Ash Focused as a nice control unit, and an additional Vi Peacekeeper for matchups that require a bit more combat strength. Jumping into the top 4, we have the Houston RQ champion Scorn of the Moon list. After the success of Nice Boys Diana and Sydney, a Frigid Jewel focused build has emerged for Diana, one that leans a little more into movement in an attempt to play around Hui Brooding Painter as a primary offensive unit. Most of Dhawally's list is formed as expected, in terms of which cards are included, but the ratios of our Diana list will differ. Stack Deck, Stupefy, Ravenbloom Student, and Tide Turner all maintain 3 copies in addition to Frigid Jewel and Hui. These cards are all very important for the engine of this deck and its showdown potential. Gus slots in with 2 copies for early game control, 2 Flash are included for defense, as every unit's role within this deck is very important. We have 2 Hard Bargain as a counterspell that plays nicely off of Diana's legend ability thanks to the extra energy, 1 Turn the Dust for gear removal, 2 Ride the Wind as a defensive tool that can provide Hui with 2 extra move triggers on offense, 1 Smokescreen as a spell that's been adopted by Diana for combat support against mighty units, 2 Fizz Trickster as a unit that's really good at setting up offense with a spell recursion, 2 Moonfall as a really powerful combat trick, 2 Starcross for unit removal, which in this deck can be just as good on defense as it is for offense, 2 Vex Apathetic as arguably the best control unit in this format, and 1 Vex Cheerless as a showdown-oriented unit that loves slotting into mind decks. Traveling Merchant and Consult the Past also find room here as unique draw support options that haven't been seen much in Diana lists up until now, both of which pair nicely with Frigid Jewel, and Traveling Merchant loves all the movement support as well. This build is really strong when it comes to dictating the flow of combat by controlling if and when showdowns occur. Shifting to the sideboard, we have 2 more Turn to Dust for additional gear removal, 1 more Moonfall for more combat support, 1 more Starcross for unit removal, 2 Singularity for mid-range and late game decks, and 2 Baron Nashor for aggro matchups. The second semi-finalist is one that I'm really excited about, with Housesarebig on Wuju Bladesman. The original Master Yi legend has seen a big comeback with the resurgence of Dazzling Aurora, but after 2 RQs, this tempo variant is the only list that's been able to crack a top 8 with a super unique build. Throwing it back to the Origins meta, On Guard, Charm, Defy, Sabotage, Discipline, Pit Rookie, Zhonya's Hourglass, Challenge, and First Mate all return as Master Yi staples from that era. But the addition of new units like Rengar Trophy Hunter and Ruin Runner have pushed Tempo Yi to a new level. Ruin Runner was arguably the most feared body unit from the Spirit Forge release, and Rengar Trophy Hunter has quickly become a dominant unit as well. These are joined by Lonely Poro and Scuttlecrab as 2 drops that offer more draw support with solid legend synergy, as units that love to go to battlefields on their own. And Uxtron Mischievous as a gear tech unit that can be placed in the main board with much more confidence in Wuju Bladesman compared to other body decks. Master Yi Tempered is the chosen champion as a smaller alternative to Master Yi Honed with ganking and deflect once he reaches his XP threshold. But the card that's most compelling to me is Primal Strength. In the Origins format, this spell was seen as pretty excessive as the Calm Domain already had the best combat tricks anyway, so the 7 extra might was only really useful against Dazzling Aurora decks. So in a meta where Dazzling Aurora has made a comeback, and other strong mid-range decks like Irelia and Diana sit at the top of the meta, I love the inclusion of Primal Strength. This build is probably the best that Riftbound has to offer when it comes to combat trick-oriented decks that can compete with legends like Irelia, as it always floats the possibility of having significantly more might than what's presented on board. The battlefield selection comprises of Emperor's Deus, Seed of Power, and Starspring thanks to their legend synergy, draw support, and offensive capability respectively. And the sideboard rounds out the deck with 2 more Sabotage for control decks, 1 Unyielding Spirit for spell decks, 1 Disposal Order for chaos decks, 1 Alpha Strike for additional combat support, and 3 Disarming Rake for gear removal. This deck is the only build in the top 8 that doesn't main gear hate, if you exclude Sabotage. Finishing in second, we have a legend that really shocked the community, with Samdsherman reaching the finals on Pridestalker. This shouldn't be the most surprising, as Sam is an RQ champion, but even though Rengar has been seen as a decently strong legend, I don't think many people were expecting to see him in the finals of just his second RQ. What's even crazier about this finish is how simple and relatively straightforward the build is. Only 3 cards in this deck are run at 2 copies, with every other card having 3, aside from the chosen champion. It's somewhat fitting that a build this simple would give the best performance, as Pridestalker arguably has the simplest ability of any legend. Even though this build features strong cards like Punch First, Thrill the Hunt, and Darius Trifarian, what really stands out about this build is how it platforms and plays around Irresistible Feyfolk. From the games that were shown on stream, this little 2-drop was an absolute monster. The pressure this legend creates can completely shut down opponents from initiating their own offense, which is perfect for an aggro deck. The combo of Feyfolk into Ambush has quickly become one of the most oppressive in the format, and Sam utilizes it masterfully. Even down to the battlefields, most of this build is pretty standard, with the only somewhat unique decision being Kinko Initiate. While Rengar doesn't necessarily play around mighty units, Initiate slots in nicely as a unit that can trigger its ability easily while also contributing to Pridestalker's legend ability. With a deck that's heavily focused on playing units, you have to incorporate units that can effectively offer draw support as well, which puts a lot of value on Kinko Initiate, Nidalee Catform, and Kaisa Survivor. I'm not sure if we'll see Rengar crack the top 8 again during this format, but this finish was really cool to see as it proved how powerful off-meta decks can be when overlooked. Taking a quick look at the sideboard, the build is finished with 1 more Sabotage for decks that can easily remove units, 1 Unyielding Spirit, likely as Elder Dragon tech, 1 more Challenge, 3 Uxkhal Mischievous for Aurora matchups, and 2 Brynhir Thundersong as a control unit that pairs nicely with Thrill of the Hunt. And finally, in first place, we have Alanzq reclaiming his throne with his 6th top 8 finish and 2nd RQ win, opting to run the more traditional Diana build as opposed to the Frigid variation. Again, most Diana lists really come down to ratios as opposed to unique cards, so most of Alan's list is similar to Dhawally's list that we already covered. But with no Frigid, Alan's list leans a little more into unit removal and movement instead of the combat support that Frigid provides. Aside from that, everything else relatively mirrors Dhawally's list, with the exception of acceptable losses. This isn't a card that we've really seen at the top level of play in any format so far, but one that I really like for this meta, specifically for Diana. With the inclusion of Ravenbloom Student, this is a 1 energy gear removal card that also acts as a combat trick thanks to its action speed. This means that against Aurora decks, for example, you can remove Aurora from the board while increasing Ravenbloom Student's might by 1 or 2 if you're on Abandoned Hall. And the reason why this works so well with Diana is because her legend ability provides you with 1 extra energy per turn during showdowns, which means you've removed Dazzling Aurora, giving yourself an extra might or 2 at action speed, basically for free. While I have grown to like the Frigid iteration of Diana, this list definitely feels the most prepared for the current meta, with a better spread of answers overall, as opposed to primarily leaning into just Diana's strengths. Taking a look at the Day 2 conversions, the bottom tier of legends remains with few surprises. Garen and Rumble failed to make Day 2 for the 2nd time this season and have been joined by Jax, Wuju Master, Jinx, and Leona, who had 13%, 7%, 10%, and 9% conversion rates at Sydney respectively. Jax's failure is likely to do with how much gear hate is being seen in main boards now in response to the success of Dazzling Aurora. Wuju Master continues to struggle to find any viability that Wuju Bladesman doesn't already have. It's somewhat strange to see Jinx in this position, as she already had a decent conversion rate in Sydney, and other Chaos and Fury legends saw massive leaps from Sydney to Vancouver. And it's all but confirmed that the stun buffs from Unleashed have been mostly meaningless so far, as Leona fails to reach Day 2 for the first time since Atlanta. Jhin and Ivern both saw their first Day 2 appearances, as they both failed to reach it in Sydney. Renata Glask also saw her first Day 2 appearance of the season, jumping from a 0% conversion rate to 6%. Yasuo and Vi both saw 3% drops in their conversion rate compared to Sydney, which leads me to believe that they're not adapting very well to how this meta is stabilizing. Blind Monk also saw a slight increase, going from 5% to 8%. And Volibear is arguably the biggest loser from the surge of gear removal. While all Dazzling Aurora legends obviously lean heavily into the card, Volibear has the least consistent draw engine of the group, which makes it much harder for him to navigate Aurora tech. As a result, he fell from a 15% conversion rate in Sydney to 6% in Vancouver. Moving on to the middle of the pack, we have some interesting results around here. Ahri saw a slight increase of 2%, and Pyke and Lucian both saw drops of 5% and 3% respectively. Pyke just doesn't seem to have an ideal list figured out yet, and Lucian seems to be taking indirect heat because of Aurora tech. Poppy and Sivir both saw massive declines in conversion, with Poppy dropping 10% and Sivir dropping 21%, which shows just how much of an impact Aurora made at Sydney and the effectiveness of the community's response. Fiora, Victor, and Vex also fell by 4%, 3%, and 3% respectively. After Vex's success in Sydney, I'm sure a lot of players tested heavily into Vex Apathetic to prepare for Vancouver, which leads to more answers for the champion and legend by extension. And we also saw some notable increases in the middle of the pack. Lux doubled her conversion rate from Sydney, Orange tripled it despite all of the gear tech, Teemo jumped by 4% with a fair amount of players inspired by his top 8 finish, Darius moved up 3%, Lilia has stabilized around 16%, and Pridestalker saw a slight increase of 3%. It'll be interesting to see how much that number changes heading into Utrecht, as even though he's not considered a top legend in this format, his finals appearance could turn some heads. Closing things out with our highest conversion rates, there's a lot to unpack here with the fall of Sivir and other Aurora legends. Wuju Blazeman, Void Reaver, and Bounty Hunter were the only body legends to land in this top third, but most of the top E decks were tempo iterations, and none of the top Kha'Zix decks were running Aurora. This is really cool to see as it shows how adaptive the player base has become and how intentionally the meta is evolving. With Aurora falling, LeBlanc is stabilized with only a 1% increase. Kai'Sa and Ezreal are back in solid form after a lackluster showing at Sydney, with Kai'Sa seeing an 8% increase and Prodigal Explorer seeing a 12% increase. Dazzling Aurora is Kai'Sa's longest running bad matchup, with tempo decks being what she generally prefers to see, so it's not terribly surprising to see the meta responses positively impact her. As for Ezreal, with so many Mind and Chaos players shifting their attention to Diana for the first Unleashed RQ, Ezreal seems to be almost entirely abandoned. This has left a lot of room for experimentation, as a lot of the top Ezreal lists have some notable differences between them, and despite these inconsistencies, he finished with a better day 2 conversion rate than Diana. It'll be interesting to see how this dynamic plays out over the course of this format, as even though Diana has had better top end performances, finishing in the top 8 4 times now and winning an RQ, Ezreal still seems pretty viable. Misfortune is the only Aurora legend to see an increase in response to the flood of gear hate, which at this point seems to be on brand for her, as she somehow plays better every time Aurora is struggling. Azir quietly increases conversion rate from an already impressive 18% to 24%, showcasing that he's one of the better aggro decks in this format. Rek'Sai was the biggest climber of this event, finishing with a 25% conversion rate after failing to make day 2 at all in Sydney. Frankly, I'm not entirely sure what caused this massive increase, but her top list had become somewhat more consistent compared to Sydney, so she's definitely a legend worth looking into. Set saw an increase of 4%, remaining one of the best legends outside of the top tier. Master Yi fell by 6%, but seems to be in a healthier position overall, with players moving off of Aurora and back onto his tempo build. The most interesting legends sit at the very top, however, with Kha'Zix seeing a 16% increase, Annie climbing up 2%, and Draven jumping 14%. While none of these legends landed in the top 8, these overall performances show that the Chaos Domain is finally starting to shake off the effects of the Spirit Forge bans. Playing in a faster, more combat-oriented meta really rewards these legends, as they all share an aggro to mid-range identity, and Draven and Kha'Zix in particular love combat. Despite them being massive increases, I really don't think these results were random. If Aurora continues to slip, and they start to land some top 8 finishes, these Chaos Legends could force some massive changes in the meta. And even though she failed to make it out of the top 8, Blade Dancer sits atop the conversion standings with a 5% increase. That wraps up this tournament recap for the Vancouver Regional Qualifier. If you're interested in testing the top 8 decks and the best of list for each legend, then take a look at my Piltover archive profile. If you found this video helpful, feel free to like and subscribe. Good luck in your games, and thanks for watching.